My name is Leora, and the she, her is based in Los Angeles, currently in Berkeley, California. And I'm the project director for the School Crisis Recovery and Renewal Project. I'm here with my colleague, Oriana. Oriana, do you want to do like a 2-second sentence? Because we're going to introduce ourselves much later. You're going to do a 2-second welcome. And you have to do, yep.
My name is Oriana Ides, and I am a field coach this work. I am excited to be here in conversation and in partnership.
Wonderful. Thanks, Oriana. So Oriana and I will be leading the learning today. Really wonderful time for us to sit in conversation. It's mid-October. And as Oriana and I were in discussion with some other educators yesterday, we know that this time of year for all of us who work in schools is really full. It's really full with, that word made me take an exhale. It's full with how much we've been holding the last 7 months. It's full in the regular calendar year. It's full for us in our workload and all that we're managing. And I'm seeing everyone in the chat box. Many of you are in the work of crisis response and of student mental health. And so I can only imagine how much more full it is. So we are launching the foundational modules for the School Crisis Recovery and Renewal Project. So today is really an introduction and a grounding and a settling, because we are about to kind of set off a whole module of learning. And one of the principles of us engaging in this work is really starting with a shared language, or at least a shared framework of what this work is, has been, and could be. So today's conversation is really about creating language, or surfacing the ways that we can talk about what crisis is, what response is, what recovery is, and what renewal is, so that later down the line, when you're engaged in really good coaching clinics with Trauma Transformed, or you're engaged in other learnings from our project, that when we say something, it might land in the same way, and when you say something, it might land in the same way. So it is from noon to 1:30, although California Pacific time, although I know you are across the country. And if you are able to stay on the full time, we really welcome you to do that. If you are not, all of our webinars are going to be recorded and uploaded on our website. So you'll be able to listen to us as you take your walk, or any other thing that you're doing further down the line. All right, let's get started. Yes, welcome, Wendy, Moore, Washington. Lovely. Okay, so we are funded by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration, and this is the disclaimer. We're grateful for the funding, and also all views and opinions that are expressed in this webinar are ours only. And so I hope that we consider ourselves disclaimed and we can move forward. So Oriana is going to lead us in a little bit of grounding. I don't know how many of you have already been on a lot of different meetings and conversations and work this morning. And so we wanted to offer a moment to just calibrate so that we can ready ourselves for the conversation. Oriana.
Yes, thank you. So regardless of where we've been today, where we're at in our minds, just taking an opportunity to come with as much presence as possible, I'd like to invite you to take a deep inhale. If you feel comfortable closing your eyes, do so. That's definitely not necessary. You can lower your gaze or find something beautiful around you. You can look at your hands. Choice is yours. Bring notice to your feet, your heels. If you can, plant them firmly on the ground beneath you. Take notice of that sensation. Take notice of the way the ground is always beneath you, always holding you. Bring your awareness to your belly. If you can, if you want, take a hand, place it gently on your belly. Feel the rise and fall of a breath. Imagine it cleansing if you'd like. Bring your awareness to your neck, your shoulders. Are they forward? Are they back? Invite you to take one ear to one shoulder. Feel that stretch. Maybe the pace of an inhale and an exhale. And to the other side if you'd like. Bring your awareness to the crown of your head, the energy that surrounds your head. One final collective breath, sweeping from the tip of your toes as you inhale to the top of your crown. Hold it and exhale. Thank you. Thank you for that collective breath. Thank you for that quick body scan. And now that we've oriented ourselves to our body and our breath a little together, we'd like to orient ourselves to you. So as Leora said, my name is Oriana Ides. I am a longtime educator, born and raised in San Francisco. I live in Oakland now. And I am deeply committed to the healing, the growth, and the transformation of young people and those that serve them. I've played the role of teacher, school leader, and also therapist, program developer, and most recently done work in building communities' capacity to uphold the school. And I am really excited, really honored, and happy, joyful to be a part of this work here. So I'm going to hand it over to Leora.
Thanks, Oriana. Thank you for that that moment to ground and settle. I am with you, Ing. That was really beautiful, and it helped my nervous system get ready to guide us. And so I hope that that felt resonant with folks out there. My name is Leora, as I mentioned, she, hers. I'm the project director for SCRR, the School Crisis Recovery and Renewal Project. I'm also born and raised in San Francisco and have also played the role as, I know, native San Franciscans, they really exist. Have also played the role of teacher and youth organizer, college and career specialist, district coach, and national technical assistance provider and trainer and facilitator, lots of different hats, and now get to step into community with all of you to guide us through the next 5 years of this project. So incredibly grateful for being here. And we're gonna take the next couple minutes to introducing ourselves and to our projects and to today. We'll spend the most of our time together thinking about the language around school crisis readiness, response, recovery, and renewal, and our particular focus on leadership and the different limbs and arms of leadership that goes into this work. Oriana will be sharing stories, bringing the theory to life. Some of us really engage in work from our heads and love the language and theory and frameworks. And some of us really engage in learning with our hands, and they want the strategies and the to-dos. And some of us really engage in the work with our hearts. We want to connect to folks who have shared experience. So we're hoping to provide a little bit of all three today, knowing that most of today might feel a little heady, because the way that we're hoping that these sessions feel is that you'll have some coaching clinics led by our partners that I'll talk about at the end, where you'll get to really sit in the work, both the hands and the heart work. And then we'll close again with upcoming opportunities and how we can support you. And so I want to remind you, this is a Zoom webinar. You are not on video. You get to walk around, you get to move, you get to stretch, get to go upside down, wherever you are. We can't see you, so do you. And, you know, some of us are really constantly engaged in the conversations around school crisis and student death, or school community death and dying. And so we have a little bit more room to hold that language. And some of us might be experiencing really acute crisis in this moment and grief in this moment. And so we may have less space from it. So just watch the way that you need to engage with this conversation. I'm going to remind you to please, please, please see the chat box as a vibrant conversation fireplace. So, so definitely let us know when something that we said landed or something didn't land. Let us know if you have resources or you have different ways of talking about this work. We've got your wisdom from Washington, Massachusetts, Oregon. Where am I missing, Oriana? So many different states all across the country. New Jersey, PJ. So please let us know and be engaged with us. All right. I'm going to do a quick introduction to our project if you're not yet familiar, and then we'll get to get into it. So again, welcome to the first webinar of the School Crisis Recovery and Renewal Project. We use the term SCRR as an acronym in case that is a new acronym to you. We're a combo platter of teammates from the Center for Applied Research Solutions, for whom Livia, Oriana, and I work. And we also are so incredibly grateful to partner with Trauma Transformed, an organization out of the East Bay Agency for Children. Ang, Francesca, Jen, and many other folks on the line are our partners, and we'll be co-leading this next 5 years together. And we get some really good advisement from a lot of school crisis recovery and renewal experts, primarily through the National Center for School Crisis Bereavement. Many of you are familiar with the NCSCB. So all three together are your team. And we are really grateful to be a new grantee through the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, a network that's been around for 20 years, leading us through the work. And just as an interesting fun fact, that the NCTSN actually was founded really in purpose by, or brought to life by a lot of scholars in the aftermath of 9/11 and thinking about child trauma after 9/11 and what the work looks like after, which is a perfect fit for us because our work is really thinking about not only school crisis readiness, not only school crisis response, but what happens after. What is the life after, the year after, the day after, the week after, and what's the 5 to 10 years after? You know, many of us who are educators, we have students who are in our lives, some of whom are now educators and therapists who are still holding experiences that we all lived through together. So what does the long-term work look like? So we are your project to help us think around school crisis skills, knowledge, and attributes necessary to lead this really complicated work. I'm going to briefly introduce us to our team. We've got a really diverse team full of therapists and public health folks and educators. And so we know that this work is complex. And so we created a team of multiple funds of wisdom to support you in this moment and in the next 5 years. I'm gonna just say that we're here to provide evidence-based and culturally responsive services. And we really hope that our work with you feels trauma-informed and healing-centered. It's not just the what, but also the how. So this session and our project is really based on a foundational guide that many of you contributed to called the School Mental Health Crisis Leadership Lessons, and Livia will be posting the link into the chat box. There's both a reflection worksheet and a guide. And so a lot of the content, especially today that we'll be introducing to you, is from the guide. And really it's in purpose to lift up voices of your colleagues out in the field who have already navigated a big moment, a big crisis, and are offering their experience. And so there's a reflection worksheet that will guide us in thinking about what crisis means, what safety means, what recovery means, what renewal means to us and to those we serve, and also led by stories of impact. Okay, last but not least, we really hope and invite you to just take what you need from this next 90 minutes together. Know that you'll get the supporting materials. So after today, we'll be sending you the PowerPoint and we'll be sending you resources for follow-up. So if your brain goes to like, oh, Leora spoke too fast and I didn't get that link, we promise you will get the link. And the other invitation is that whatever resonates in this moment is what you needed in this moment. So sometimes I can hear a presentation or a workshop multiple times and I get a different thing from it every single time because I'm in a different space every single time. We also know that we have a limited amount of time together this morning or this afternoon, but the urgency of this work isn't. And I just want to be really explicit that I know that there are some of you personally who are explicitly navigating student death this week, student death from last week, student death from our collective experience. So some of this feels really acute. And also we're all in the middle of COVID and a pandemic and multiple pandemics. And so the urgency of this work is real, and it's not limited to just this time. So we're here with you for the long haul. That also speaks to the now and always. And then the invitation, because we want to provide the trauma-informed principle of choice, is that you can engage in this learning as a person, as a professional, crisis response, first responder, student support services, TA provider. And some of you also facilitate these conversations. And so you kind of want to check out the way that Oriana and I have designed this time together. Your choice, your experience. All right, let's get started. You ready? Yes, okay. Let's get started. So all that intro to say, we're gonna take the next couple minutes to think about what does crisis mean to us, what does safety mean to us, and all these terms. So it'll feel a little bit more here, and then we'll get time to be here. Okay. So our project is called School Crisis Recovery and Renewal, and it's not even about us, it's really about the term crisis. And I did see that there are many of you who have crisis in your literal professional title. So I wanted to take a moment to offer you in the chat box and making sure that it's dropped down to panelist and attendee. If you might take 5 seconds to just let us know, first gut, when you hear the term school crisis, what comes up for you? First gut. When you hear the term school crisis, what comes up for you? Yeah, so Wendy is saying a death, Antoine, a major event, Oriana, also death. Oh, Erica, danger and opportunity. Whew, yeah, both and. Cassie, something that impacts many people and systems. Nice, Cassie, to use the word systems in there. Ing, the inability to meet the need of the collective student body. Gorgeous. Patricia, trauma. Stephanie, stress and support. Lovely. Again, another both and, stress and support. And Francesca is offering threats to physical or emotional safety. We could also maybe add spiritual safety, financial safety, social safety, right? All the different elements of safety. Yeah, great. Thank you. And Cassie's offering concern for re-traumatization. Yes, that will be something that Jen and Antoine will lead us through next week. Yes. So a crisis, school crisis could potentially elevate a moment of deep vulnerability for both what we have been prepared for surfacing. Oh, we did not have that in place, or, oh, what we had in place not meeting the needs of this moment. And also surfacing areas where there might be almost acupuncture points of potential further harm. So the truth is that all of what you just put in is, yes, crisis. And we believe at SCRR that crisis is subjective to your own experience, just like the word trauma or grief. If you identify with that term, then it is it. And so when we think about the word crisis, we are absolutely thinking about both a collective experience, the experience in a system, the loss of a student, or the death. I'm going to use death-specific language, the death of a student, the death of teachers, administrators, especially if there is not collective know-how in holding that experience. So oftentimes a crisis is when the threshold of harm exceeds the level of both preparedness, of both connection and cultural readiness for navigating. And so many of us live in cultures, both in our schools and collectively, where we don't really have a lot of language around crisis. We don't have a language oftentimes around grief sensitivity or death in schools, or the know-how of what to do. So this work is actually kind of a container for holding all the sticky stuff, but mostly all the human stuff in our schools. So again, I want to offer that we are going to just start here, and this is so you might see some resonance with what you just offered, and also you might see where it varies. This is from a definition from 2003, so 17 years ago. Lots of growth, but the last piece that I want to name is that last line there that says a situation that involves a perceived threat to the emotional well-being of students, and we would then extend it to students and those who serve students. And the real term there is perceived, because a crisis is, again, as I said, it doesn't matter if it actually did happen or didn't happen. And I'm using air quotes for those of you who are listening. The crisis, if you are feeling it, then it is real. And a lot of the way that we are going to talk about crisis moving forward is whose crises we validate and whose crises we unvalidate, socially, collectively, and in our school communities. So we're going to take the next couple of minutes to talk about leadership in this work, and what school mental health crisis leadership in this work can look like. And just like I invited you before to put into the chat box, when I say the word school crisis, what comes up for you, I'm going to ask you to do the same thing right now in your experience leading through, before, during, after crises. What word comes up to describe that experience, that leadership experience? It could be one word or it could be multiple words. And I don't even mean leadership with a capital L. It could be leadership on the ground, leadership behind the scenes. What word comes up for you when you hear the term school mental health crisis leadership, or crisis leadership generally, to describe your experience? Aang is saying reactive. Cassie, trained. Wendy, calm, steady support and connection. Oof. Patricia, supportive. Kate, confusion and fluid. So this is a lot of both ands today. Erica, compassion and calm. So a leader in this work is holding both weight, as Stephanie is saying, and empathy. So the weight and the awareness of the role and the empathy for hopefully themselves and those they're serving. Let's do a couple more. Yeah, the duality is really powerful to see, right? Some of us are feeling reactive, some of us are feeling responsive. Some of us have experienced leadership that feels very fluid, and some of us have experienced leadership that feels very static. Okay, great, thank you. So we at SCRR hold school mental health crisis leadership in kind of 4 different orbs. That leadership is inclusive. Leadership is, of course, complex, always, but especially in the context of crisis. Leadership is relational. It's not just about the protocol or the policy, but about the people experiencing the protocol and the policy, and is both about the people, the individuals, the students, the staff, the community, and the family members, but also about the system itself. Many of us work in school district systems and state systems, and sometimes experience having to both liaise, figure out how to interrupt, or figure out how to not re-traumatize through the system of the folks experiencing the system. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. So those are the 4 orbs that I'm going to invite you to think about: inclusive, complex, relational, and individual and systems focused. So focusing on inclusive, I'm going to invite you, as we're talking about these points, I'm going to invite you to put into the chat box what words are coming up for you that really resonate. So, we've been doing this online of like applause, like snaps when I agree with something. So please feel free to do that in the chat box as well. So we want to hold that inclusive leadership is both intentional and consistent inclusion in the decision-making process, and the idea that many different people in the school community, many different people in the stakeholders have really different views, identities, and experiences. And oftentimes the work of a school crisis leader, whether or not it's in recovery, response, renewal, readiness, any of those stages, that leader is attuned, or leaders are attuned to the multiple ways in which people and the collective can experience a big thing in really different ways. We know that both cooperation and transparency are really essential during crises. And I really cannot say this enough. There are many of you who are professionals in this field who know that actually a leader has to make really quick choices all the time about what needs to be transparent and what needs to be transparent for certain stakeholders in a way that will contain the emotional weight of an experience. So that in itself can be really heavy. I'm looking at the words, right? The weight can be really heavy. So in terms of, we want to think about leadership, oftentimes there are a lot of voices that are not at the table when we think about school crisis leadership. And at SCRR, we're putting educators and students at the forefront, particularly because students are experience deep school crises and oftentimes are not turned to think of them as school crisis leaders. So we want to think about the student experience either in the moment or as alumna in how that impacts our school crisis response, readiness, and all of our planning and all of our work. And then, of course, the last is really thinking about how we can unintentionally, but also then intentionally interrupt the re-traumatization or the re-exacerbation of stress and trauma for specific populations. So we'll be talking about that in a little bit when we talk about intersectionality. So of course, this work is also complex. And for us as school crisis leaders, it requires us to hold multiple facts and outcomes and considerations at the same time. And one of those biggest pieces, and this came up for us a couple of weeks ago, and many now, I'm looking at folks in Oregon and California, many of us, when we're leading through crisis, we're having to navigate the complexity of both supporting the field, but also supporting our own families and our own well-beings and our own bodies and our own experiences at the same time. And so we think about that complexity when we think about crisis planning. And what that does is it requires us to be a little bit more comfortable with knowing that we will not know everything and figuring out a way to hold a container and hold a space to think about all the different partners and intersections that need to go into school crisis leading so that we don't have to be the only person knowing or the only person not knowing. This is the orb, the relational orb that we really have so much connection with. We think about the relation and the relationships, that crisis is about relationships. They're about relationships that are lost, right? You talked about student death, and they're about relationships that then amplify the healing after something. And so I'm not going to go through these fully, but I just want to actually narrow in on the last one, which is that relational leadership is the whole person thinking. So how do we actually express emotion and vulnerability? So many of us, because of our different positionalities, feel like or have been taught that we have to stay stoic. We have to stay like this. I don't have another word aside from stoic in order to move through the work. And yes, do people need to feel calm and steady? 100%. And they also need to see empathy and that we are going through it too. And of course, recognition that a lot of the aspect and the attributes of a school crisis leader is someone who knows how to recognize both in themselves and in others the work that's happening and the work that needs to happen. All of this is what prevents or can support the intervention of compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, and secondary trauma. Okay, last but not least, I'm so grateful that one of you said systems earlier. Cassie, right? Something that impacts people and systems. So Cassie already knew that we were going here. Again, a lot of text, and really the important piece from this is to know that individual and systems focus is thinking about who at the organizational, district, or school level, what is the work that everyone needs to know? Trauma, brain stress, grief, and what is the work that specific personnel need to know? And what are the even more delicate and integrated skill sets that some staff need to know? So you're going to hear me, I mean, that should feel like multi-tiered systems of support, but as applied to leadership. And we know that school mental health leadership is both and. So it's us personally and also at the collective. So all that to say, we are going to be, as we engage in SCRR, a lot of our work will be focused on how are we as people feeling, and also how is the system feeling, and reacting or responding or re-traumatizing or contributing to healing in the experience of crisis. Okay. I'm going to turn to Oriana to do a readout of our definition of a school crisis leader, and then we're going to take we'll transition into the next piece.
All right, thank you. So our definition of a school mental health crisis leader is the individual, collective, organizational, and systemic knowledge and competencies based on awareness and acceptance of the responsibility and accountability to create school conditions, climates, and culture that empower others to navigate uncertainty and harm so that all students, staff, and partners can repair, regulate, and restore.
So as you go ahead, Oriana.
Well, we would love you to just kind of breathe that in, and the words that resonate most with you, please type into the chat.
Yeah. Yeah. So are there words or phrases as you heard Oriana read and as you read through at your own pace that really strike you, that really land for you? I know for me, Oriana, I don't know how it feels for you, but for me, the words awareness and acceptance and accountability feel really powerful for me, those 3 A's.
Absolutely. For me, I'm thinking regulate. It's such an important thing and so difficult to do with so many varying needs and energies.
Yep. Yep. Oh, okay. Yeah, let's read some of the chat. So Erica is saying empower and restore. Feng, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Feng is holding awareness and cultures. Wendy is naming create and empower. Jen, collective and conditions. Not surprising, those are the words that are striking you. Also Antoine, conditions, climates, and cultures. Oriana, regulate. Livia, acceptance and restore. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So this is the text after all those other texts that I was walking us through. This is the big jam. This is the work that we as a whole team will be really holding and interrogating in our own leadership practice and in our collective leadership practice in moments of crisis and in compounded moments of crisis. So when we're experiencing and responding to a student death in the same moment as a pandemic, when we're experiencing multiple student deaths over many, many years, or even 1 year, when we're experiencing both teacher loss and a loss of safety and student death. Do you see where I'm going? So multiple things are happening at the same time. And the piece that we're going to talk about as we move forward is also how to navigate uncertainty. And that is such a piece of our leadership practice that all of us have really felt in the last couple of months. But those of us who have been navigating school crisis know even more so, even before this year. Okay. I'm actually going to move forward, but you'll get this deck. You'll get this deck, and it'll be posted on our website. And this is a really beautiful quote from Matt Redham and Sandra Acevedo from Butte County. And I'm going to read the last piece because it speaks to that uncertainty that I named. And Matt and Sandra were leading the Paradise and Campfire response and now recovery, and with us now renewal work as they thought about and are thinking about wildfire. And so they say, the inevitability of crisis is a given. I'm just going to have that hold weight for a second. The inevitability of crisis is a given. However, how we intentionally hold our humanity in what can be a protocol-driven process is what separates trauma-informed and healing-centered leadership from business as usual. The distinction must be made in an organization hoping to transcend the bonds of business to move towards humanity and healing. So we, in this work, what we're trying to do is to rehumanize experiences and systems that have often felt very dehumanizing. Okay. So we're going to transition and then we'll have a moment to pause and then we'll get to hear some stories. But we wanted to take a moment to actually talk about safety in the context of crisis, in the context of leadership. So first we talked about definitions of crisis, then we looked a little bit at school crisis leadership, and now we're going to get into some of the ways in which that work, the pillars, the ways in which that work is held up. And we know that the trauma-informed principle of safety is so foundational and also incredibly subjective and determined by structural violence, oppression, dynamics of power and privilege, whose safety is validated, whose pain is named, whose safety is not held, witnessed, or enfranchised. And so I just want to name that many of you are part of student safety work, safety division, safety coordination teams. And so the work of SCRR is actually to bring in, to weave together that emergency operations and crisis leadership and response and readiness and student safety all are in the same dinner party. They're all, that's probably not a good analogy to use during the pandemic, but they're all in the same conversation with one another. They're all in the same conversation with one another. So it's the arching goal of leadership, because we can't actually get the response or recover or renew without the experience of safety in relationship. Okay, so all that to say, we wanted just to name, and this will be a further conversation down the line, so today is just an introduction, that if we are dedicated to trauma-informed schools and healing-centered school conditions, then we also need to apply those same principles to our school crisis leadership in the recovery and in the renewal. That safety, trustworthiness, choice are all foundational principles, and that collaboration, equity, and empowerment are all foundational principles. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back one slide, and I'm not going to go back one slide. I am going to go back one slide. And I'm just curious. So again, we have 6, but I know that there are more principles that many of you use. Safety, trustworthiness, and choice. And then collaboration, equity, and empowerment. I'm going to invite you in the chat box to take a moment to think about how one principle was well actuated in your crisis leadership experience, either something that you did or something that someone did for you or with you. So another way to ask that is, how have you experienced safety in a moment of crisis before? How have you not experienced equity in a moment of crisis before? How have you experienced empowerment or not empowerment? So this is a chance for you in the chat box to share your stories, and it would be lovely if you could start with the principle first and then the sentence after. So Oriana, I'm curious if you might give an example of either collaboration, equity, empowerment, or safety, trustworthiness, and choice.
Yes, absolutely. When I think about the most healing and intentional ways we've moved through crisis, particularly student loss, has been that of collaboration, and the ways in which we've been able to bring in the family of lost students, our students, alumni, teachers, and also policymakers, not just isolating the healing, the growth, the conversation, and the work to our school site, but how we also brought in community-based organizations, working collaboratively with our district supervisors as well to really examine the policies that make gun violence so prevalent, and understanding the root causes. And so, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and Oriana and I have been connected to similar schools and shared spaces, and know that that oftentimes bringing in, I know that what you're bringing up for me, I'm sharing my experience, and I'm giving folks time to put in their own reflections. That my experience too at a school where we experienced multiple students who died due to gang and gun related violence is that we brought family members in for students to share their memories and their stories with family members, so that so that family members and students could have an opportunity to hold and to feel like they got to be in connection in a disconnected experience. Yeah. So a couple, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I believe that when we're working in collaboration, every other one of these elements really gets to accentuate and shine forward. We're empowering in an equitable way and building trust in places that have historically, existed much distrust.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Ooh, yeah, that's right. And I just wanted to read a couple and then we'll move forward. Erica's saying empowerment within collaboration, gorgeous, allowing others to speak and inform to the practices, traditions, and strategies that would help them heal. Thank you for the word tradition. That's a powerful word. Patricia, empowering students to know and understand their resilience and even potentially resistance in experience of crisis. Colleen is saying collaboration with a group of students who had already suffered death loss to help inform policy and practices that support grieving students. Yeah, so a lot of shared practice here. Great. Okay. So we are going to take a moment to just take one question, and actually I'm going to focus on the last question, and then we want to talk about these things matter and then get to some stories. These are reflection questions that we hold and that we will be using in our coaching clinics and beyond to really think about our own relationships to crisis. So I'm looking at your names and your roles. I know some of you are principals and some of you work at districts. All of us can investigate and really sit in inquiry around what our relationship to ambiguity is, or what our relationship to loss of control is. That last question for me, what is my personal narrative with crisis and how does that impact the way I lead, has been really necessary for me to sit with, especially the last couple months. So I'm going to just encourage you all to identify one of the 4 questions that you might want to play with in this moment, that's landing for you in this moment. Oriana, do you have one of the 4 that's just the question that's landing for you?
Yeah, absolutely. The relationship to ambiguity for me.
Yeah, the relationship to ambiguity. Yeah.
Across all things of my
Yeah.
life.
Yes. Okay. So take a moment to identify which question you want to sit with, and we're going to shift. That's not true. We're going to take a moment. Take a moment to breathe and hydrate and move. Okay. So we're about 10 till 15 till. It's been a lot of content so far. So I'm just going to encourage us to take a moment to breathe and move and hydrate. I'm going to do the same right now. Stare at a beautiful stock photo of a mountain, wherever that is. May we be there someday. I'm going to do a stretch. You're welcome to join me. Okay. For those of you who are listening, we're just stretching and breathing and moving and hydrating. All right. So the next piece, as we turn, now we're going to move into the next piece that we titled These Things Matter. And the full transparency, speaking of trauma-informed principles, is that we came to These Things Matter after listening to multiple stories of school crisis leaders and finding the themes. We're finding the themes that came up in all the stories. So the reason we're saying these things matter is that no matter where you are in crisis readiness, response, recovery, or renewal, that these things matter all the time, always, foundationally, and that you can go no wrong by choosing 1 or 2 or all of them to focus on as a school crisis leadership team or as a systems leader. We're going to go through them quickly, but they will be the foundations of a lot of the work that we'll be talking about coming up. So if anything felt fast, I just want you to know that there will be modules in this seminar, in this foundational module series, that will be able to explore these much more in depth. Okay, so I'm going to go through this, but I do again want to know that the way that the visuals are set up are so that you have both a story. In this slide, names and definitions, it's a story led by Jen Leland, who is our field director. And on the other side are also either elements or questions to sit with. So foundationally, we believe that number one, that names and definitions matter. How we call the thing holds the thing, so that words have weight. So we're using this word crisis. Some of you might be leading school communities where the word crisis doesn't resonate. You might find another word. Some of you might be using the word safety, but it might be assumed safety. And so it might actually be the work of a school crisis leader to unpack what that assumption of safety means. Jen notes that on the left-hand side, Jen notes that naming is in itself a school crisis renewal practice. Naming in itself is witnessing. You know, Becky Haas says that trauma is running around the world trying to find a witness. So how much, it gives me actually goosebumps every time I say that, how much can we provide the names and definitions for the things for people to have the witness and the affirmation of their experience? The second element of this work is that equity, equality, and intersectionality matters. So if our crisis plans only reflect a certain student population, there's room to grow. And if our crisis leadership work is only focused on those who have the most access to healing, we have room to grow. And so we want to think about school crisis leadership, both all the different elements from both an equity, equality, and intersectional lens. And if those words are unfamiliar to you or they feel like catchphrases to you, that also might be part of the leadership work so that we can sit with it. And Yasmina, who is in Arizona on the right-hand side of the deck, also offers her experience when thinking about emergency operations and thinking about it from who will be the most harmed because of structural oppression, because of social determinants of health. The third is that roles and positions matter. So the question is, how might our crisis recovery and renewal work actually involve all stakeholders? You all named collaboration over and over again as a foundational trauma-informed principle that was really integral to part of your experience. So we know that collaboration always sounds nice and is the hardest in practice. Collaboration requires interdependence and trust, and a lot of us have worked in systems where those two things are both absent. In itself because of unhealed or unrepaired crises. So we want to think about how might we actually call upon different roles in a moment of crisis to do the work so that we, again, are not doing it alone. The fourth, and I hope that this really resonates for so many of you, this is like, this one is the one that resonates for me, is that supporting the supporters matters. So oftentimes we provide some supports to students, but educators might be left to fend for themselves, to figure out that experience for themselves. And by the way, let's name principals and administrators, particularly during this COVID crisis. You all have had to middle manage so much. So what does it look like to create concentric circles of crisis care? So that. And then the last is partners and partnership, right? So that, again, we cannot do this work alone. You'll hear this repeated and repeated. And we want to think about how do we elevate and amplify partnerships that speak to bereavement, that speak to grief, that speak to trauma, that speak to healing, that speak to embodied work, that speak to clinical work, that speak to traditions of those in our school communities and new traditions that we can co-create in our school communities all together. So You did just hear me use the term bereavement and crisis and ambiguous loss. And I just want to hold that this is an element that we'll be naming coming up in one of our upcoming series, is the complexities of and consequences of crisis. But just very briefly, before we turn it to Oriana to share stories, very briefly, I wanted to name that you may hear us use in this work the term trauma, the term grief, and the term crisis. And I want to be really explicit that I am not actually lumping them all together. Sometimes crisis evokes trauma. Sometimes a crisis evokes grief. Sometimes they are independent, and sometimes they are actually quite different. And for us as leaders, we have to become attuned to how they might be intersectional and how they might be different in order to navigate all those different dynamics, all those different complexities, and to think about not only the primary, but also the secondary, the kind of ripple effect of the crises work. So we'll be talking about this work later, but I wanted to just make sure that for those of us in this conversation, that we know that this work is deeply layered, deeply layered. So very last but not least, you've heard me use the term readiness, response, recovery, and renewal. And so I want to just offer our frame, because our modules will be really focusing on not only these 4 R's. Next week, Jen and Antoine will be leading the 4 R's and the 5 C's, but also it helps us understand where this project fits in the continuum of the work. So we define readiness as the thing that's happening before a big thing. So the competencies and collaboration and communication, both thinking about the past, what has happened, the present, what is in front of us, and the future, what will happen. Because as we've discussed, we know that crises will happen. So we cannot have teaching credential programs, school social worker programs, therapist pre-service programs anymore that do not name this work, right? We have to get ready. That response is during a big thing. So the time frame of response is the present, the right in front. Many of you are the responders. And the main role is the protection and reduction of harm and panic. And again, Jen and Antoine will be talking a little bit about that more next week. And I also want to acknowledge that there are those of you on the call who are dealing with that right now. The third and the fourth are where we come in. We're thinking about recovery in the past and the present. So that's the week or the month or the year after a big thing. And the renewal work, which is both thinking about the present and also the future. What could be, how to name and navigate and normalize, how to construct a coherent story about ourselves and where this work is going, and create meaning making so that we can actually put pieces together, that things don't feel silenced or broken up or isolated from one another. So we are focusing on the last two, knowing that recovery and renewal are not absent from readiness and response. These are not stages, right? These are layered experiences. So again, some of you are experiencing thinking about recovery while also responding, or prepping folks to get ready while also engaging in renewal work. All those things can happen simultaneously, but that's also where partnerships come into play because of our own roles and positions. These things matter. Some of us may have more space to deal with different R's. And that also has to do with our own relationship with each different stage. So this is when I get to take an exhale and I get to turn the mic to Oriana. Oriana, I'm going to invite you to actually move your, to come closer to the mic so that we can hear you. Yes, beautiful. And Oriana is going to share her experience in the field. I chose this image intentionally because they're canopy trees, and it's an image that really reminds me of Oriana's practice. So I wanted to just give it to Oriana, and then we'll come back together.
Thank you. I want to be really transparent that I had notes around what I wanted to say before sitting here through this presentation. And because healing is not linear, so much is percolating in my heart and my mind right now. And so I love this image as well because it is what I saw as I was leaving the parking lot of the school that I'm going to talk about a little bit. For 8 years, looks very much like home to me. Yeah, so I'm thinking about the crisis that I am going to talk about some as being a really big thing. And, you know, the death of a student is a story that I want to share, and the way our community struggled to experience that loss. And thinking about the story that I want to share, I realized that I've been a part of a community that has lost students every single year. And even as a student myself, I can think back to the 6th grade, the first time I remember losing a classmate to death by suicide. And so it's a pretty big thing. And there's also the crisis of the Rodney King riots that I remember growing up in, and Desert Storm, and family members leaving to war, and what we're experiencing right now. So just there's so many types of big things we experience, and a school is a container that often has to be responsible for most of the healing, because explicitly nowhere else is really tasked with that. But there are also the traumas and the crises that occur when a student you know, has a mental break in a class and no one knows how to handle it after, and there's been no processing of what everyone just saw and experienced after. And I'm just sharing some of the crises and trauma that is coming up for me, and I'm reminded of as we go through this presentation. The thing I want to spend most of the time that I have talking about is the importance of naming and norming, and the power that that provided the community I was a part of, in our ability to really recover and become anew or renewed. And I love how cyclical these R's are, because your ability to renew and recover really impacts how ready you are for the next round, because it's inevitable that we are all experiencing this. And so the first time I was a teacher in a community that lost a student, we were a very new school, and it was our 2nd year of operation. And we were a small school, small community. Community started and community led in many ways. And so every single student within that 280 student body was seen and held and known in really intimate ways. And so we lost a student, and I think it was many of our first time losing a student, and we heard about it in a staff meeting. He was killed on his way home after school. We didn't have any mental health professionals on staff. It was a group of young teachers for the most part in their first few years of teaching. And we had an advisory system, so we did not have counselors, as the teacher was the advisor and the counselor. And we did not create a container for the grief that came. We had the idea of an assembly, and I remember young people just wailing down the hallways and the stairs and on their feet. They're falling to their feet, falling to their feet, unable to walk. And the collective grief we were not ready for. We were not ready for, and we didn't know how to hold it or contain it or move it to a space of of anything constructive, productive. We didn't know how to move that energy. And the reason why I say naming is so important is because as a school, we took a pause a few years later and looked at our community agreements. And we looked at the way we all defined safety. We looked at the way we defined respect and equity. And until we were able to really have a collective understanding of what those things meant for our school and the type of space we wanted to create, we weren't able to hold the inevitable grief that young people were experiencing on a daily basis from smaller things or big things such as loss in that way. And I wanted to pose a question to you all around your school values and the communities you've been a part of most recently and the values in those communities. And I'm wondering which value you would lean on most to support your community through either readiness, response, recovery, or renewal. And so I want to ask you to maybe type into the chat, if you would, a community value that your school holds that you could imagine leading you through something like this. And I'd love to see your responses in the chat. As you're typing those in, our school had values like everyone shows up to learn. We use school time for learning. They were not congruent with our community. They were not, they did not resonate with our students. They weren't necessarily transferable. And in many ways, they were about compliance. And when we were able to shift our values to something more resonant with our community and create a collective naming, we were able to establish more safety and within that have a structure to lean on during crisis. I'm looking to the chat to see if anyone is willing to share the value they could imagine within their community, being leaned on to support through grief, through crisis, through trauma, through loss. You see Adriana sharing? I have an experience. This is collective grief here in New Zealand. Thank you for being here. As teachers, we could not deal with our grief, so it made it hard to support our children. Absolutely. As teachers, some of us felt guilt for not intervening early and not responding to the children's grief. Grief turned to anger. See, a value is compassion. Thank you for sharing that, Adriana. Community, a value in our community was from the Maori, came together, the local mare, to come together as one. See, a central value is cooperation. In reflection, I'm struggling to connect to how that value contributed to our crisis recovery and renewal because we did not cooperate. Cole, we envision a world where understanding and patience allow loss to be integrated into our lives and led to greater compassion, lead, hope, and growth. Yeah, I think it's really important to think about and even discuss collectively as a community the values that you have and how relevant they are to the things that we're experiencing, not just in the classroom, but as a community and outside of our school spaces as well. And you know, there's ways that we can connect any one of our values maybe to one of these 4 R's, but just the time to talk about how it does explicitly connect, I think is really important and valuable time spent. We're at 107, so I'm gonna hand it back over to Leora.
Thank you, Oriana. I actually wanted to invite you. I know Jen just put the value of respect, and that can be a beautiful one if applied to care and respectful care and not compliance or control. Thank you, Jen. We know that sometimes we as schools can say respect, but really what we mean is respect us as those who hold power, respect us as adults. And we just respect students and families and communities. And I just wanted to offer too in conversation, Oriana, that I did see that Colleen put, I'm not at a community agency, I'm not at a school. And Colleen, thank you. We've been using the term school community, but we are centering school communities as the nucleus, knowing that there are many different partners. That's part of the These Things Matter, that the partners and roles that go into being part of all the hands to support the young people and those who love them to move through something big. Oriana, I wanted to offer, if you wanted to just take one more sentence to feel a sense of closure before transitioning, so that it's not time that's pressuring you, but just for you to give a sentence of closure, and then we'll move forward.
I just am really taken back in this very moment about how unlinear healing and renewal is, and how important it is to be in conversation about what it is we are experiencing, but also what it is we have experienced. And so this, you know, I'm speaking about a moment right now that was 16 years ago, 17 years ago. And it's still bringing up a very visceral sensation for me, to imagine all that our young people held in that moment and held prior and continue to hold. And so, and then I'm noticing in my language there that I take myself out of what I'm holding. So as someone said earlier, is the teachers also, and the people working so closely with youth and families need to take pause and acknowledge what they feel too. So
yeah, thank you for that. It just made me exhale. And part of what I wanted to offer, knowing everyone who's joined us in conversation and who will be listening to us in the future, is that many of us, because of our response requirements, we feel like we don't have the space or the place or the privilege to take reflection or pause. And that is a natural, physiological response and reaction into handling stress and handling crises and handling harm. And so what Oriana is literally offering us is the invitation that time does not have a container for this work, that we actually can, even if something happened 20 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, last week, that we can constantly revisit it. And that's part of our work together. And revisit it until it doesn't need visiting in the same way anymore. In the same way anymore. So we're moving into closing, and that's actually a perfect space because we're going to move into closing. And I wanted to just read a quote from David Kessler. Many of you know David Kessler if you are involved in grief, as many as I saw in the beginning. And I'm just going to read it out, and then we're going to talk about next steps. And what I wanted to name is that, so David Kessler writes this: when we talk about holding space, which is a term that you may have heard Oriana and I use frequently throughout this time, and also that I know all of our coaches will use. When we talk about the term holding space, we mean the practice of offering the experience of being heard without fixing, solving, or treating, This practice is essential to our healing and renewal. Each person's grief is as unique as their fingerprint. But what everyone has in common is that no matter how they grieve, they share the need for their grief to be witnessed. That doesn't mean needing someone to try and lessen it or reframe it for them. The need is for someone to be fully present to the magnitude of their loss without trying to point out the silver lining. So I'm using that, and I'm bringing David's wisdom as both a grief specialist and as someone who has experienced grief in his personal life to name that we at SCRR are not here to fix what you are holding. We're here to witness with what you're holding and make meaning of it together. So again, as you heard, we are focusing on the last two R's, on the recovery and on the renewal. You'll get in the deck, you'll get some quotes that we pulled out that really help think about what recovery looks like. And I really just want to name that recovery is a function of school safety, that recovery is a function of self-care and collective care for educators, that recovery is a tenet of being trauma-informed. And same with renewal, so that we focus not only on what is happening, what happened last week, but also the continual work so that we can weave in the meaning making in the long term. So all that to say, we're perfect. We're gonna take some time to reflect, because we just talked about recovery and renewal. So we're gonna actually take some time, as in at the end of every single one of our learning sessions at SCRR, to practice some reflection, even if it's for a couple minutes. So Oriana, I think you and I are both gonna lead through this. Do you wanna go first?
Yes, so this is an opportunity for us to reflect on the last hour and some change, and our lives in its totality, actually. What takeaways, ideas, quotes, pieces are really sitting with you, still resonating with you? So if you could type that into the chat, we would love to hear. Again, any ideas, quotes, pieces that stood out to you, or that's still lingering, that you maybe will be thinking about as we close. Type that into the chat. 3 takeaways.
Yeah. You want to go first? What is one takeaway that you're holding on to?
One, Adriana just shared, I'm sorry, I don't know, Adriana or Adriana, I hope I'm not mispronouncing your name, but you just shared the Maori belief, the Maori knowing that everyone who enters into our space is coming with a strong community of family and ancestors. And I'm thinking, oh, I'll carry that into my wondering next, but definitely powerful, and I will take that with me. How about you?
I'm taking that I want everyone to know that it is okay to get overwhelmed while teaching on a webinar. And I'm holding, Oriana, your modeling because we actually talked about a school crisis leader being able to be an empath and be connected to our own experience and those around us, and how powerful it is for you to just be in exactly what was coming up for you. So that's what I want everyone to know. Yeah. As Oriana and I are sharing, please, in the chat box, please include your 3s, your 2s, and your 1s, your takeaways, your wonderings, and your own appreciation. And of course, you can totally go rogue and say, I don't have the space for 3, 2, or 1. Here's just something that's coming up. What were some wonderings or questions or curiosities, Oriana, that came up during our conversation today?
Well, along the same lines of the knowing who stands, with us in community, and the lineage and ancestors that are also in our space, I'm wondering how that influences the space we create. What practices, what rituals, what questions do we ask ourselves with that information?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, how about you?
I'm holding the question of of really thinking about how my own experience with crisis in my life impacts the way that I crisis lead. So I read that line and literally I was trying to hold myself from being present and also being analytical and thinking about my own experience leading this project. So that's a question I asked everyone, and I invited everyone to sit in reflection moving forward, and realizing that I was really inviting myself. So thank you. And then what do you want to end? There's some folks who are putting in the chat box. I'm going to allow for a little bit more time. I wanted to see if you had an aha or an appreciation or connection for how you are, what you are already doing, Oriana, that you wanted to name.
I have appreciations for others. I guess the aha for me is that it's difficult to appreciate myself. Yeah, I think I feel appreciation for all I've withstood throughout the years, maybe, and the ways that I've managed to compartmentalize in effort of moving forward. Yeah.
Thank you. I am appreciating, I just want to do a connection to what I'm feeling, which is I'm feeling like just deep being struck by all the folks on the call who across the country have put in their reflections and have been taking care of multiple needs probably while listening. And so just feeling a connection to feeling very, very overwhelmed with this conversation in a striking way, not in a harmful way, but in a heavy, good way. I just want to reorient us to the chat box. So we've got some folks who are connected to your story, Oriana. Erica is naming that idea of leadership isn't always with a capital L. You're not always the emergency operations director, yes, the principal, the school crisis manager, but often doing school crisis leadership work behind the scenes, low key, as they say. And Adriana really resonated with the Kessler quote and thinking about how we as teachers ensure we are regulated in times of crisis. And we might even think, Adriana, as we move through this work, why we assume that we have to be regulated in times of crisis. And wouldn't that be interesting to think about if we allowed ourselves to not be regulated? Not in a way that causes harm, but a way that causes empathy for ourselves as people. Colleen is naming, taking away how those doing the work are real, whole people too. That loss waves in and out of our lives and can show up unexpectedly, and that's okay. And we're showing courage doing this. I mean, yes, absolutely. Kate is naming hunger for more information related to renewal. Yes, Kate, good. Yes, more coming. Feeling motivated to advocate for a longer lens on healing. Loved the Butte County Schools quote, and thank you for that. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Matt and Sandra. And Colleen is curious how to support the school communities as an outside provider, right? As a connected provider. Great. So continue to put your reflections in the chat box, your 3, 2, 1s, your 3 takeaways, 2 curiosities or wonderings, and 1 appreciation, or something you're already doing. We do have about 3 minutes for questions. There haven't been any that came up in the question and answer. So if there are questions that come up in the chat box, particularly about anything that we've said or upcoming work, please let us know and I will live answer them. And we'll also share how you can get in touch with us and where this work can move forward, particularly how to satiate your hunger, Kate, as we think about the renewal and recovery work. So let's move into looking ahead so that we have time to transition to the next part of our daily schedule. We're going to talk about how to continue your learning with us and how to get involved and how to access TA. So yes, here are some ways that you can get involved. We actually, speaking of naming and witnessing, we're inviting anyone connected to schools, even if that is through a provider, to submit a picture or an art piece or name to our virtual ofrenda in honor of Dia de los Muertos that's coming up the first week of November. So we're going to be creating a virtual altar. It's a wonderful way for us to really hold space for all of those who are our school crisis ancestors. ancestors, the students and families and administrators and anyone involved in our school community whose lives have impacted the fabric of our school community, either past, present. Thank you, Livia, for putting that in the chat box. Beautiful. We also are, of course, continuing the foundational modules. So next week, Jen and Antoine will lead us in really zooming in on those R's and also on the competencies in leadership. So feel free to tune in for that so that you can get a little bit more in depth. I showed one slide, they have many more. And then speaking of what Feng just put into the chat box, this coming November, there is a completely free open 2 days Grief Sensitivity Virtual Institute that PJ and I and many others are leading. And that is an opportunity for school mental health folks and clinical folks and general folks to engage. And of course, we're holding that right before the Thanksgiving holiday because we know that holidays tend to really surface a lot. They did before COVID and they will certainly now. So please continue your learning with us. And speaking of these modules, you're in the first session. Congratulations, first session. So we're going to be doing this pattern. There's 4 different sections of the modules, and we're going to be doing this pattern of webinar, coaching clinic. So if this is feeling like a little bit more talking at you than you generally like, we are hoping that you join us for the coaching clinics with folks like Oriana and Jen and Antoine and Ang and many other talented field coaches to actually engage us in reflection and connect with one another because we are our best teachers, each other. So the next one coming up is October 22nd, 4 R's and 5 C's, and it's specifically on how to lead a school community during the pandemic response. So I know that we are SCRR, Recovery and Renewal, but we cannot do recovery and renewal work without thinking about the response work, particularly in this times. And then again, at the end of October is our Module 1 coaching clinic. So even if you can't come next week, join us for the coaching clinic. It will not be a webinar, it will be a Zoom meeting. So you'll actually get to unmute and share out and connect with one another and see faces beyond me and Oriana's. Module 2, we then move into recovery. So there will be 2 sessions on recovery, then a coaching clinic, and then Kate, look what's coming up in December for you. 2 sessions on renewal and then a coaching clinic. And then we'll get even more work into leadership and then end in January for coaching clinic. So that on the left-hand side of our programming is the foundational modules. Throughout the year, we'll be hosting webinar series. Please let us know if there are specific topics that you'd like more work on, MTSS and crisis leadership, specifically student-led recovery work, let us know. We'll be hosting a leadership series February through May, so stay tuned for that. And then coming up February through May, anyone interested in, as a team, intensive coaching focusing on emergent stressors in related to COVID work and how that speaks to crisis recovery and renewal, please join us for that. And of course, you're invited to access us for technical assistance and intensive coaching all throughout the year. So all that to say, we are going to close, and Livia will be putting in the evaluation link is the word I want to say, and we'll also be sending it out to you. I know that some of you had to leave before this time period. It really helps us to get feedback from you about who you are and what brings you to this and how we can really respond our programming to your needs, and also helps us get better and continuously responding. So please, please, please do give us feedback. It takes about 2 to 3 minutes. I tested it myself personally. And as before we really close, I just want to say again that if you do have technical assistance needs, please let us know. You can just submit a TA request. We're already in motion providing technical assistance. And then always check out our website at www.schoolcrisishealing.org. Get social with us, follow us, email us. We're here for you. On that note, we're going to end. I'm wishing you a day that is full of connection and reflection and feeling like you know that you are supported and resourced in this work that you're doing. I am just holding, especially I think Feng just said, I'm holding love and compassion and forgiveness of oneself. And so just sending lots of love and compassion to all of you so that you may love and provide compassion to all those you serve. Thank you for coming to our first webinar of SCRR. Thank you, Oriana, for sharing your wisdom, Livia, for sharing your support, Jen, for always being an incredible partner, and all of you who have said, okay, yes, this to us. We're just incredibly grateful. Thank you.